You're getting into all this trouble for nothing, man. All of this for a puppy?
It wasn't just a puppy. It was Snoopy! Ah!
What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, bringing you my review for John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. By the way, before I talk about the plot with this film, there will be spoilers for the first two John Wick films throughout this review. One shouldn't even be watching any reviews for the third John Wick film if you haven't seen the first two films, don't know what the series is about, or even if you haven't watched any trailers for this third film. So, there you have it. With that spoiler warning out of the way, the plot for this neo-noir action film follows our titular character, John Wick, played by Keanu Reeves, an ex-hitman who finds himself on the run from legions of assassins after a $14 million contract is put on his head. Going into this movie, I was extra excited to see it. Now, I never saw the first two John Wick films when they were first released in theaters, but I did watch them for the first time at home last year, and I really dug them. These are some of the best action films of the decade, and Keanu Reeves, just wow, what a force to be reckoned with in those films. Him and Tom Cruise, two actors who are now in their 50s, have really reinvented themselves as true action stars with recent films such as the Mission Impossible franchise, which Cruise has starred in, and obviously the John Wick films, which Reeves is the main star of. Now with the advent of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, especially after what went down at the end of Chapter 2, this looked like another adrenaline-filled, balls-to-the-wall action film with the stakes being higher than ever for Mr. Wick, and like I said, I was extra excited to see it. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we of course have John Wick, our titular character, played by Keanu Reeves. Now, as he has shown off in the previous two John Wick films, and even in action films all throughout his career, such as Point Break and the Matrix franchise, this guy has a real knack for pulling off some badass stunts and just showing off his physicality to where we see most of the stunts being performed by Reeves himself, and it is all the more impressive to see him be able to show off all of his stellar moves. But performance-wise, I also think that Reeves is probably one of the few actors who could have pulled off the role like John Wick in the manner that he does, and not just the role being tailor-made for him, but also with him having this personality to him after all that he has went through in the past couple films, and given how these movies apparently take place over the course of a few weeks, there's a lot going into it on top of his backstory, and Reeves here, once again, his unbelievable badassery is permeating throughout this film. Some returning players from the previous two films include the likes of Ian McShane as Winston, the owner and manager of the Continental Hotel, the organization which John Wick used to belong to, along with these other assassins. McShane is strong as always here. There are some stakes that are packed against his character as well, creating a lot more to his arc. There's also Lawrence Fishburne as the Bowery King, this underground crime lord. It was so cool to see him introduced in Chapter 2, where we saw a mini Matrix reunion between himself and Keanu Reeves. It's always nice to see him. There's also Lance Riddick, who also returns as Sharon, the concierge of the Continental Hotel. He has some moments to shine in this film too. Some new additions to this film include the likes of Halle Berry as Sophia, an old close assassin friend of John Wick. Now, personally, I am not the biggest fan of Halle Berry. I've always thought that she was a talented actress, but over the course of the last decade, after her Monsters Ball Oscar win, she has just been choosing so many crappy projects to be in. But Here in John Wick 3, this is a return to form for her. Her action scenes and the overall physicality that she has alongside Keanu Reeves makes her show off her own badassery, especially in this one moment where she has this long take sequence all to herself, showing off the action between her character and her dogs even. It's so superb. We also have Angelica Houston as a character known as the Director, who is also close with John Wick. Now, she doesn't have that much screen time, and I should mention as well, Halle Berry doesn't have that much screen time either, but the screen time that we do get with these two ladies, I think is pretty outstanding to say the least. Other new additions include Syed Tag, I apologize if I butchered that name badly, but he plays a character that is integral to a specific moment of the film, so I will not give away what he contributes to the film, but I did think that he was solid in this film. And then the other notable new addition here is Mark Dacascos, who plays Zero, the main assassin who is after John Wick, after being hired by a character named the Adjudicator, who I will mention more of with the writing of this film. Many of us recognize Dacascos as the dude from Iron Chef, and he himself is a famous and talented martial artist, and the fight scenes he has against Keanu Reeves' John Wick, wow, some of the best moments of the film. His character even is a bit of a fanboy of John Wick, saying how much respect that he does have for him. I just think he's a formidable foe against Wick throughout this film. So all in all, while I thought the central cast mostly did a terrific job throughout the film, the big shout out has to go to, once again, Keanu Reeves as John Wick for being the core center of this entire franchise. The writing of this film immediately starts off directly after the ending of Chapter 2, where we see Wick on the run from the Continental after he has broken the rules of that organization by murdering on their sacred grounds, and he is literally looking at his watch every so often. McShane's Winston did give him an hour head start after all to prepare himself for what is to come next after all these other assassins and hitmen are out to get him for that $14 million bounty. Now, that in itself sounds like a simple premise, but after all of the continuous plot threads that have been infused with this franchise ever since the first film from 2014, it does add on a big culmination of sorts for this character, as he is on the run, but also the emotional arc that Wick does have. One would also think that since this franchise is mainly action-oriented, that the story wouldn't matter that much, and in some respects, the story is second to all of the awesome action that we do see throughout, which I'll mention in a bit later. But what I've always admired about the John Wick franchise is that their own mythology and their own universe world building has always been so fascinating to me. And in this third entry, it is no different. More of this universe is expanded upon, where we get to see more of the Continental and the High Table explained. It's actually all tied into the real life history of the assassins, which I only knew some of the backstory of from the Assassin's Creed games. So I thought that was really neat to see it all tied in together. So that's one side of the story, with Wick on the run and fending off all of the assassins that come his way. But then the other side of the story, the B plotline, if you would, involves the character played by Asia Kate Dillon, who is known as the Adjudicator for the High Table. Now, this character is basically a big MacGuffin or plot device to get the story going, and also add on to some of the arcs to Ian McShane's Winston character and the overall arc of the Continental, as that's really one of the best characters in the entire franchise. The Continental itself, along with John Wick himself. Now, the Adjudicator character, I didn't think was that much of an interesting addition to this series. That's one issue I do have with this film, writing-wise, as when the Adjudicator does first come in, this character is, again, something to push the plot forward, but also it didn't seem like that there was much interest to what the character was doing at all, as this character is back in New York while John Wick is running all over the place, him eventually going to Casablanca and Morocco, and all of that, and the adjudicator even hires the character played by Dacascos. And I don't think it's really the fault of the performance from Dylan. I thought that Dylan did a fine job with what material that was brought onto this actor. But yeah, I just thought that the addition of the adjudicator was not that compelling of one, and all this character basically did was hire Dacascos' character to go after John Wick along with his own cronies going after Wick too. So with the story, I did think that it did another outstanding job expanding the universe that the John Wick franchise has set up since the first film. But like I had mentioned before, a lot of that story does come second to the action. And once again, the action in this franchise continues to up the ante. The various martial arts moves and other choreography here is all pristinely shot with some really crystal clear cinematography from cinematographer Dan Lauston. A lot of it is done in wide takes along with a lot of long tracking shots, which is just almost pitch perfect to see all around, because that is the way I think action should be mainly shot, because it shows off how well prepared and well rehearsed the actors are, and the rest of the stunt performers too are in fighting on screen. I just have to give a big shout out to the stunt ensemble for this movie too, because they do just as much hard work as Reeves and the rest of the known name actors across this film. They are literally putting themselves at risk of being hurt on camera for the sake of our entertainment, and a huge round of applause has to go to them. Back to some of the action though. Different forms of martial arts, as I said, are shown off in this film. Kung Fu, Gun Fu, as it has been touted since the first film came out, is used to such an effective degree, and even the use of other objects aside from conventional weapons are used to Wick's disposal, such as a book. Early on, I mean, death by book. Who would have thought that Wick would have done something so potent with an object like that? There's also a ton of sword play, a lot of knives being thrown, a lot more objects are thrown at these characters than I would say compared to the first two films, but I thought that added to the variety of the action shown off. Even the use of animals. Wick is shown in one notable sequence riding a horse. He even used a horse to help him fight with the action in the stables when he runs into the stables, where he gets that horse to ride off on the New York City streets. And then the dogs, as I mentioned earlier with Halle Berry's own animals. Wow. I mean, this franchise did begin with Wick's dog being murdered in the first film, so it was so gratifying to see fellow canines help out with some of the fights. A lot of the credit for this amazing action being pulled off throughout this franchise doesn't just go to the stunt ensemble and Reeves himself, but also to the director, Chad Stahelski, who worked with David Leitch on the first John Wick film, but then solo directed Chapter 2 and now Chapter 3 as well. He helms it all with such precision in showing off all of the goods that us fans of the franchise want to see. Other technical merits aside from the cinematography that I have to give praise to include the production design, which, like the previous John Wick films, look so immaculately put together. Like the final sequence of the movie taking place in this room full of glass and crystal skulls. Like, wow. I thought that the sequence at the end of Chapter 2 in this Hall of Mirrors looked inventive enough and really hard to shoot and edit altogether. But wow, it is No different in chapter 3 with the final action sequence of this film, and it also looking like it was really hard to edit as well with all the reflections and all the glass breaking everywhere. Like, big props go to the design department there. Speaking of the editing, the way this movie is strung together frame by frame, as I said, the movie is mainly shot with wide takes and long tracking shots, and all of it being supplemented together, I thought was done to just about a pitch perfect degree here. And then the music, I have to give a shout out to the music as well, and adding on to the pulse pounding and blood broiling tension that this movie created, and just getting all of our excitement up to see the action. It all ran along pretty well at about 2 hours and 10 minutes. The movie began with the first 20 to 30 minutes or so with just straight up action and more tension building in Wick on the run. And the same thing applies with the ending in the aforementioned sequence in that glass and crystal skull room. The middle section of this movie, I did see a lot of people taking issue with. This chunk of the movie takes place in Morocco, and that's when Halle Berry's character is introduced. And I thought that it was more interesting than most because, again, it went into more of the backstory of the assassins and just all around the arc that Wick had in him trying to be emotionally gratified with all that he has gone through in the past few weeks and even before the events of this franchise even began. So for me, I thought that it was still investing with that middle section even before all of the rest of the action does mainly take place. As far as other issues I would say I have with this film, aside from the adjudicator character, it really amounts to just nitpicks, I would say. One issue I had with Chapter 2 does carry over into Chapter 3, and it goes into the overall groundedness and believability of these movies in terms of the action playing out in an open space in public. In Chapter 2, with Keanu Reeves' Wick and Common's character fighting each other in plain sight in front of a lot of people. Granted, it was at night, but still people were around. They were shooting each other and literally fighting where a bunch of people could see them doing so, and I didn't see a lot of them flee or freak out at the sight of violence, really. A lot of that does carry over into Chapter 3 with people being shot, killed, or just whatever, attacked in plain sight for a lot of people to see. And specifically in some of the New York City sequences, we don't see that many people concerned or really fear for their own lives too, especially with this one moment in Grand Central Station. There are people everywhere walking to and from their destination, and people are just off quickly. I think this contributes to why the first movie is still my favorite of the franchise, as it felt the most grounded and believable in reality, as realistic as these movies are. But aside from those cons, I think that John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, which by the way is Latin for prepare for war, as it is so cleverly tied into towards the end of the movie, yeah, it is another badass action film in a badass franchise that fans of this series will really come to enjoy. I can see a lot of people saying that this third entry is their new favorite of the franchise just from the action alone. This franchise continues to show off why it is one of the best action film series in activity right now. And speaking of that, without giving any spoilers to the way this third film ends, it does leave it open for a Chapter 4. Though personally, I would have liked to have seen this franchise end right here at the end of the third film, so it would be wrapped off in a neat trilogy bow. But I would really be open to seeing more of this franchise continue. In the end, John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum comes definitely recommended. My final verdict for John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum is 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.